Alrighty, welcome everyone to Tough Love, Tough Talks, as it were, the subcategory of the Tough Love podcast. I am joined tonight by the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Timothy Alberino. Tim, welcome to the show again.
Oh, nice to be with you again.
Glad to have you back. Last time, folks, if you were with us, we talked about the megalithic structures in Peru. That was our primary focus. Were they Nephilim architecture? Was it fallen angel technology? Is every single hybrid we see a Nephilim, or are there subcategories of hybrids that were created by the Watchers? We covered all that in the last talk. It was a fantastic conversation. So if you have any questions concerning megalithic architecture and who made them and what the implications of that are, especially for, I guess, the antediluvian world, and then what that possibly means for our end of days scenario, then go back and check out that podcast episode. My name is Eric Rolon. I am your host in Jesus Christ. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share these videos here. Pop on over to Locals if you enjoy the work that I do. I include PDFs of all of my research documents, with endnotes included for anybody who donates to the page, and your support is greatly appreciated. Also, stop on over to Mr. Tim's website here. It is timothyalberino.com. You can learn more about him over here, his research that he's done, the expeditions that he's taken out to Peru, and some of the discoveries that they got to make while on expedition in the Andes Mountains. It is there's a lot of rich information here. Also, check out his members only section of his website here. You can join the Alberino analysis. We have a monthly fee here, or an annually built one here. This is content you're not going to get anywhere else. Lots of incredible information. Folks in the comments last time commented a number of times saying it was worth it just for the 3 episodes that you had done. I think it was in relation to some of the expeditions that you were doing out in Peru, I believe.
That's right.
And actually, I wanted to ask you before I went further on, you had mentioned that you guys were filming a series, and it had a lot to do with discovering Tauripunku. And is that going to be aired on any network, or is that just going to be on your website?
Very good job pronouncing Tauripunku. It is currently being shopped around. It's going to end up somewhere. We don't know exactly where yet, but for now, people can watch it for free if you sign up for an annual membership on my Alberino Analysis members community.
Okay, so be sure and jump into that, folks. Last time when we were having our conversation, Tim, he went into expound upon some of the walls they ran into while trying to get scans of the ground outside, I believe it was Sacsayhuaman, scan to find out where the Chincana was. And it is a fantastic story. But jump into the member site here so you can actually get the visuals, because they do much more justice than still shots that I found on Google will do of those walls and structures. You can also find Timothy's book over here on Amazon or through his website. It is Birthright. I finally got my copy the day of our last show that we did together, and I have been ripping through it as fast as I possibly can, so we have plenty of fodder for conversation this evening. The book is outstanding. It covers everything from our antediluvian world to the end of days, and so much in between there. It's there was a lot of research I'm gathering that you poured into this, and it's evident in how eloquent you are on the pages here. You've done a fantastic job with the book, so I mean, pat yourself on the back there, Tim.
Thank you.
You can also find Tim over at his YouTube channel here. Lots and lots of awesome content here as well. Specifically, I enjoyed this playlist section here, where we have a breakdown of the first 9 chapters inside his book Birthright. It's sort of like a synopsis. I don't think there's a single video in there that's over like between 15 to 17 minutes. Tons and tons of great information to whet that palate and get you excited about this book. So do your due diligence, folks. Again, as I said towards the end of our conversation last time, the Berean challenge gauntlet has been thrown down at your feet. That is born of Acts 17:11. And that says, don't you go ahead and take anything that myself or my guests say as the God's honest truth. You are encouraged and empowered to do your own digging and research to see if the things you have been told are indeed so. that being said, we're jumping into a conversation tonight, back on the Nephilim kings, the unholy usurpers. This is largely going to be a conversation discussing Tim's book Birthright and the lurid subject matter held within those pages. So first up, as I said, I went through all the lecture series there, and I decided to sort of read your book a bit out of order. I jumped past chapter 9, and I jumped right into, I believe it's the new religion, and that I found to be incredibly fascinating. You talked inside there right away about Friedrich Nietzsche and how he piggybacked off of the writings of Darwin and the idea that we have this evolution of man that is supposed to be this this overman, the superman. And jumping back to your previous chapters where you talk about Imago Dei, the image of God, us being created in his image, and the sons of God, it really rounded out for me a deeper understanding of what it means to bear the image of Christ. So I wondered if we could sort of speed through the beginning little section of Birthright, where we have initially Adam being told, hey, here is the world. I want you to subdue it. I want you to conquer it. The world is yours and the fullness therein. And then what happened between the fall and then man giving up their birthright?
Well, the premise of my book, Birthright, begins, as you say, with Adam, who is bequeathed dominion of the earth. He's given dominion. He's not told to take it. Rather,
Sure.
the declaration is have dominion. And the implications are staggering. It's not, we have to, I think, jettison this notion that Adam was a gardener. I don't know if we've been doing a lot of interviews lately. I'm not sure that if I was talking to you about this or someone else, but we have to, as I said, do away with this notion that Adam was a gardener. He wasn't a gardener. Adam was a vice regent of a planet. And he was created for two purposes, two primary purposes, really. First and foremost, to have fellowship with God. That is his first and primary function, was to fellowship with the Father and with his siblings in the Father's house, to be a member of the family. And then secondarily, he was created to govern the earth, because the sons in the kingdom of heaven are created to rule, to govern. And so Adam is, of course, fashioned from the dust of the earth and is given, bequeathed dominion of the earth, dominion of this realm, the terrestrial realm. And I think that is a much more accurate reading of the story of Adam, which to a large extent, I believe, is an allegory. And I think the problem is that sometimes we read these stories, some of these stories, there's certainly a whole lot of historical content in the Bible, very accurate historical content, but there's also a lot of allegory. And I think that if we begin in the beginning with Adam, not as a gardener, but as a governor, then it becomes much easier to understand the things that unfold in the biblical narrative, and indeed the things that are unfolding today. So the birthright of Adam, and by extension of all his offspring, you and I, is dominion of planet Earth. We were created to govern this place. And dominion of the earth is not given solely to the righteous. It's not the right to rule among the children of men, among the offspring of Adam, is not earned. It's not merited. Rather, it is inherited in our genome, which means that good, bad, or indifferent, men govern the earth because we are the sons and daughters of Adam. And we inherit through Adam his genome, and along with that, the right to rule, his birthright, dominion of the earth. And that plays into, I believe, the unfolding of eschatological events, the so-called end times that all of us are so familiar with. If you grew up in the church, familiar with many different positions and opinions on the end times. But what we cannot do when looking back is we cannot frame Adam and Eve as gardeners, because things going forward won't make sense. And then looking forward, we cannot discount or fail to include in our consideration of things that are unfolding the most portentous things that are happening in the earth right now, including transhumanism, which has set us on the course of posthumanism, including artificial intelligence. All of this is headed towards posthumanism, including as well the alien presence and this unfolding of disclosure, and also, finally, a new religion that is emerging in the earth or will emerge in the earth soon. All of these things have to be taken into consideration when we think about where we are, who we are, and where we're going. And I discuss all of these matters in my book, all of these topics, and I attempt to weave them together in a coherent narrative that takes us from, indeed, a pre-Adamic paradigm to a post-human paradigm. So the time before humans and the time after humans.
So specifically inside the early chapters of your book, I liked how you framed the creation of the universe, its first cause not being for man, like so many people are led to believe. God created the universe for man, and we were the reason why he built it. But in fact, it being created for Jesus Christ, it being not just his domain, but him being that first cause, the reason for it existing at all. And I'm sure you're familiar with even within the second verse of Genesis 1, where it talks about the Spirit of God hovering over the surface of the water and how the earth had become formless. The transitive verb there actually meaning, and it became without form, or became void, became chaotic. There's so much prehistory there that we don't get a real great sense of from the Bible. We understand that there was this civilization, that elder race in existence, but we don't see a whole lot of that again within the pages of the Bible. But one of the things that you talked about was in the Imago Dei, being made in the image of, we have the sons of God, those direct creations from God, and how within his holy kingdom, only those bearing that image are permitted to be a part of it. And how, because the Watchers initially wanted to come to Earth, and they wanted to take up human wives, and they wanted to procreate offspring and have a family, they themselves could not attain to the thrones of men, but they had to circumvent God's
because
will.
they weren't human.
Yes.
They weren't the offspring of Adam. It's very simply said, they were not human beings. And so dominion of the earth is the birthright of the offspring of Adam. And so our dominion, by the way, is in force. Let me back up just one moment. Yeah. So as we're jettisoning this idea of Adam being a gardener, we should also disabuse ourselves of the notion that the universe revolves around us. In my book, I talk about the anthropocentric worldview versus the Christocentric worldview. Mm-hmm. And most of us are hamstrung with this myopic view of ourselves and our universe, in which we might envision a wheel, and a wheel with many spokes, and the hub of that wheel is us, is ourselves. that the human species, we are at the center of all things, and all spokes lead to us. In other words, all other characters in this grand narrative, all the events that are unfolding in the universe revolve around us. This is a very, I would say, on one hand, I want to say it's a very medieval view, but on the other hand, it's so prevalent among modern Christians as well. And I find that curious because it is not a biblical worldview. It is not the correct theological worldview. The biblical writers, the writers of the New Testament, clearly portray a Christocentric universe and a Christocentric perspective through which, a prism through which we should view the universe. And that simply means that Christ is the center of all things, not us, not human beings. And so, returning to our wheel, if we were to remove ourselves from the hub and rather we're one of those spokes, and in our place we insert Christ, the Son of God, he's the center of the wheel, then we have a correct and accurate theological worldview. Christ is at the center of all things. The Son of God is the center of the universe. That is the biblical worldview. And so that is the worldview that we should begin with. Anyone who approaches the Bible wants to have an accurate understanding from Genesis to Revelation. You must approach it with a Christocentric perspective. And so much of your theology will be automatically adjusted and corrected as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we deal with topics like the topics I write about in my book, including posthumanism and the alien presence, the alien threat, as I put it in my book, those who do not have a Christocentric perspective, those who are hamstrung with an anthropocentric perspective will stumble, will have a hard time swallowing this notion that there are other players in the game besides the human species, and that humanity is in great jeopardy if we don't understand the value. The two questions, really, the value of our species. So there's two questions that, and I'm not even sure if I pose these questions in the book. I think I do. But they're the most important questions for our generation. These are the two most important questions for our generation. Number one, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be human? That's the first question that is paramount. We have to answer that question. And the second question is intrinsically related. Is our humanity worth preserving? Those are the two most important questions that we're faced with in our time. Because we are on the cusp of losing our humanity, of transforming the human species into a post-human being, and losing in the process not only the trademarks that make us human, our very humanity, but losing the birthright that is associated with our humanity. And what happens when the sons, the offspring of Adam, lose their birthright on planet Earth? And that's one of the questions that I ponder in the book. And I believe that the ramifications, the consequence of humanity losing the birthright of Adam by evolving out of Adam, so to speak, are nothing less than catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding who we are, what does it mean to be a human being? And the answer to that question, by the way, is marvelous. The answer to that question really addresses the yearning, the innate yearning of the human heart, because it tells us why we draw breath, why we were created, why the human species came into existence. And as I said in the beginning, the answer is fellowship with our Maker. And there is no greater purpose. There is no higher purpose that one could attain to than being created to fellowship, being created for the pleasure of our Maker and to find pleasure in fellowship with him. That is, as I said, the primary purpose of our existence, and that is the answer. It is literally the answer to the yearning of the human spirit, the human soul.
Mm-hmm.
And we, of course, the great tragedy of the human story is that we have become sundered from the family of God, from the Father's house. That's the great tragedy of the human story. But then there's this the late Russ Distar used to use the phrase, or rather the appellation, the hero of humanity. There's this hero of humanity who comes on the scene, whose mission it is to reconcile us back into the Father's house, into the family of God. And that person is, of course, Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of Man. And this is the original, by the way, this is the original heroic tale. And one might say, well, how can it be the original heroic tale if Jesus came around many, many centuries after those who lived before the 1st century AD? Well, because the plan was put into motion while Adam was still in the garden. So the story was already unfolding before there was a story to tell about the human species. The story of our redemption is the first story. And that story is not even about us. It's about the hero, the protagonist of the story, and that is Jesus. That is the Son of God. It's his story. And so those of us who believe in Christ, belong to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a heroic figure who enters into our story. See, it's his story. And we are a part of it. And so this is, I think, just these few things that we've been discussing here in regard to the proper perspective of what we were created for, the Christocentric perspective of the universe, having Christ at the center of all things, and then the purpose for which, the secondary purpose for which we were created, which was not to garden, but to govern. And by the way, what does that mean? Why govern? Because we are players in a game, or rather, I think more eloquently put, we are actors on a stage.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not the only actors in this play. We play our part. And so when I say that Adam was created to govern the earth, well, it is in the midst of a very expansive kingdom that includes places that are outside of planet Earth. And so we govern this realm, and we were supposed to govern it. We were supposed to, as the late Michael Heiser used to put it, extend the Edenic rule, so to speak, to extend the will of the Father in regard to life on earth as we progressed from Eden to fill the whole earth, filling it with the goodness and mercy of God, and filling it with justice and with all of those attributes that are fundamental to the kingdom of heaven, the goodness of God. And instead, we did the opposite. Instead, because we became sundered from the family of God through disobedience, we began to fill the earth with violence and darkness. And we became bloodthirsty and power hungry and greedy and and became an affront to the kingdom of heaven because we lost our purpose. And so that really is the bedrock of Birthright. And it's the story, as I always say, it's the greatest story ever told. And it happens to be the original story of mankind because it preexisted us, because it's not, in fact, our story. We're just ancillary characters in the story of the Son of God.
You bring up a great point there about it being his story, and not without purpose. The church I'm attending currently is doing a series, and it's called His Story, Our Story. And the overarching thing is that it is his story, but we are, like you said, we're players within that story. I love that the New Testament points out that Christ was slain from the foundations of the world already. The plan of redemption was set before God even said, "Let there be light." And we also know that we were called from that same foundation as well. Like you said, it's already been his story from the beginning, from the get-go, the first cause, as John describes him as being the Word, being with God and being God. Without him was not anything created that was created. And by him, all things are held together. So you bring us to a great jumping off point there, and I'm glad we actually got that bedrock laid rather quickly, as to our place inside God's kingdom, us being given dominion of the world, and then the lead up to what we did to fumble the ball, as it were. You describe inside your book this I wouldn't say it was one event, because if we're talking about the sons of God, the watchers coming and taking brides, any of whom they saw, I imagine there were any number of wedding ceremonies, and as you described, with all the pomp and circumstance that would come with somebody wedding this being created directly of God. But the lead up to that, I want to get into that there. Throughout your book, I know that you've done a ton of research into the Book of Enoch. So we have some extra biblical literature, some that is also very highly venerated. We have even the Ethiopian church; they still have the Book of Enoch inside their Bible that they pull from regularly. But I want to talk about Adam having dominion of the world, his sons having dominion of the world, and what happened to them that they gave up their birthright? What happened to them that they gave it away?
I think what happened in the Genesis 6 affair is a precursor to what is going to ultimately unfold at the end of the age. So if we begin from this starting point, that Adam and his offspring have dominion of the earth, they're going to now spread out over the whole face of the earth and populate in various cultures and build cities and do everything that human beings do. Remembering, of course, that they were supposed to do this in allegiance to the kingdom of heaven, and to rightly and justly represent the king of heaven as his vice regents on earth, which we began to screw up immediately.
Yep.
So that was the purpose, and that was what was supposed to be unfolding after the creation of Adam. So when you fast forward and you get to generations down the line, you get to, according to the Book of Enoch, Jared, you encounter this very interesting interruption of that plan, the interruption of the protocol of human beings spreading out over the earth and having dominion and being the vice regents of planet Earth. And that interruption is really, it is caused by a company of interloping extraterrestrial beings. I mean, I can think of no more accurate way to describe it than that. And these beings are called watchers in the Book of Enoch. And the watcher denomination is not exclusive to the Book of Enoch, and it's not an extra biblical term. Indeed, we find it in the Book of Daniel, in a very interesting scene in Daniel in which a human king, Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, I should put a bookmark here for a moment and make sure that I make the point that although we are the vice regents of the earth, the kingdom of heaven, specifically the king and his council, reserve the right. It is their prerogative to intervene whenever they want, whenever they see fit, to enthrone or dethrone any human ruler as they see fit. So that's an important detail associated with human dominion. We aren't allowed just to do whatever. There are consequences. And I'll return to that point in just a moment because there's another important thing we need to say before we move on. But Nebuchadnezzar was obviously a wicked king, Babylonian king, who was an affront to the kingdom of heaven. And in this very intriguing scene in Daniel, he is being judged and sentenced by a council of heaven. And this council is referred to as the Holy Watchers. Same term, Irin in Aramaic, the Holy Watchers, the Watchers. And these Watchers are presiding over the judgment of Nebuchadnezzar, who is ultimately sentenced to madness, to several years of madness. And that's a very intriguing story. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But so you see in the biblical narrative itself, you have the Watchers making an appearance. And who are the Watchers in this narrative? They are this heavenly council, what the late Michael Heiser would describe as the divine council. Mm-hmm. They're the council of the king. The king has a council. Who is the king? The king is the Son of God. And so we know when we get to the Book of Enoch, and Enoch is a pseudepigraphical text, which means that the authorship is unknown, basically. It claims to be written by Enoch, but it obviously is not in certain parts. Although the earliest portions may indeed have been written by Enoch, or at least were preserved in oral tradition from the original writings or words of Enoch. But it is in the Book of Enoch, and almost solely in the Book of Enoch, almost exclusively, not entirely, but almost exclusively in the Book of Enoch, where we find the narrative, the larger narrative of the Watchers, the ones who interloped into man's domain. These Watchers are named. There's 200 of them. And the initial, what I call the first cause of the Watchers' transgression is very apparent. It's apparent in Genesis 6 as well. Genesis 6 is making reference to Enoch directly. Genesis 6 is referencing the story that was widely known and that was well known and widely disseminated among the ancient Hebrews. And that is the story that comes from the Book of Enoch. And in both Genesis 6 and, interestingly, in Enoch chapter 6, the first verses of both, we have this perplexing statement that describes that describes the sons of God. The Septuagint calls them angels. Mm-hmm. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. That the sons of God are looking at the daughters of men and are finding them to be very attractive and are lusting after them. Now, in my book, I'm not going to do it here because it's a very lengthy digression. But in my book, I highlight the fact that if you're reading the Genesis 6 and Enoch 6, specifically Genesis 6, and the theological furniture in your brain does not get rearranged just from the notion that the sons of God are lusting after the daughters of men, after the daughters of Adam, then you simply do not understand what is being implied in the text.
Hear, hear.
And you cannot glibly read those words. You cannot casually pass over those words and with your theology intact, let's say. Because most of us have a westernized theology and a westernized perspective of the biblical narrative, which simply does not synchronize with the Hebraic view, with the Hebraic / ancient Near Eastern perspective of this story, because this story was told in several different cultures. So you have these sons of God, the Benai Elohim, who are lusting after human women. And again, we'll sidestep that deeper conversation there. People can read about it in my book, should they desire to explore that further. And you should. Whether you read my book or not, you definitely should ruminate on the fact that they're lusting after human women. And then they decide that they want to do three things. So the first cause of the Watcher's transgression is lust, right? Something that we can all understand. Lust. That's it. They lusted after the daughters of men. But we can further define their motivations, because they didn't just want, they did not just want to sleep with human women, to have sexual intercourse with human women. Rather, they wanted to take the women as wives.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to wed the women. Okay. So that's the first cause. They lust after them. They're physically attracted to them. Hear what I say. They are physically attracted to them, and they want to wed them, not come down and treat them as harlots, rather marry these women. They're lusting after them. They want to take them as wives. That's the first motivation. The second motivation is what we read as a consequence of this lust and desire to marry the daughters of Adam. In Genesis, it doesn't directly associate the consequence in regard to the steps that came between the angels lusting and then the consequence, which was the Nephilim. But the Book of Enoch does weave the narrative, so to speak, that takes place between the Watchers lusting, desiring the daughters of men, and the progeneration of the Nephilim. And what happens is the Watchers, they descend to the earth. Before they descend to the earth, actually, they make a pact. They bind themselves by mutual imprecations, the Book of Enoch says. And what that means is we're all in this together, and we will all suffer the consequences, whatever befall. That's what it means. And they bind themselves by this oath. We will all share in the consequence. And they knew that this would be a great transgression. So they bound themselves by mutual imprecations, and then they descended to the summit of Hermon, Mount Hermon. And once they descended on the summit of Hermon, which is, by the way, called the Mountain of Oath, and has been for time immemorial, they descended into the plains, and they began to choose for themselves wives, each one a wife among the daughters of men. And I do not believe that they were walking through the villages and grabbing whatever fair maiden that they desired and throwing her over their shoulder, or forcibly grabbing her by the arm and dragging her along.
Yeah.
Rather, they're down observing. Perhaps you might imagine the Watchers, this is how I would imagine it, walking through these villages, cloaked, and silently, quietly observing and choosing for themselves in their minds which women they would like to wed, and then finding out who their fathers are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because what the Watchers did next is they struck a bargain. Now, this is not implicit in the Enochian tale, in the narrative of First Enoch, but it is inferred. They definitely struck a bargain, but I believe that the bargain was specifically in regard to their wives. In other words, they chose the women they wanted to wed, they desired. They went to the fathers, and this is where the bargain takes place. A legal transaction, by the way, with the vice regents of the earth, from these extraterrestrial interlopers who have no authority on earth. Okay? Remember that. We have to return to that. So they strike a bargain with the fathers and they say, I want to marry your daughter. And perhaps at this point they reveal to all of the people that who they are. Maybe they decloak, and they're these very tall, probably extremely handsome young men. Probably, I would imagine they're 6.5 feet tall. I have reasons for believing that. Very, very handsome men, and no, they do not have wings. And so now the fathers are not dealing with mere men who want to wed their daughters, but gods, right? Demigods who've come to the earth who want to marry their daughters. But the Watchers make this offer. We give us your daughter's hands in marriage, and we will give you in turn knowledge, which will equate to technology. And specifically the knowledge, it says in the Book of Enoch, that the sons of Adam were striving to learn. Now, I believe, and this is just my own hypothesis, that it was the daughters of Cain, specifically, that the Watchers wanted to wed. And I have some reason. You can find that out in the book. It's neither here nor there, but I do believe it was the daughters of Cain, and I believe the transaction was happening with the offspring of Cain, and who were legal representatives of the human species at large. Both lines of Adam were legitimate, the line of Seth and the line of Cain. So, and we're certainly human. So it's important now to digress for a moment and highlight a very critical point here. We need to understand the protocols of dominion, of authority, rather, the protocols of authority, because the protocols of authority are in operation in the universe. And what do I mean by protocols of authority? If I am a king and you are a regent who I've assigned to go and govern a far province of my kingdom, you're going to go travel for 3 weeks, and you're going to go govern in the far reaches of my kingdom in a particular province. In order for your authority to be valid, you have to carry some token of my authority, because you're representing me.
Yep.
And so you can't just show up in this distant province empty-handed, or the people won't believe you and they won't respect your authority. The people have to understand that you are an extension of me, that your authority is my authority, and that should they cross you, they're crossing me. And the consequence would be what? They're going to have to deal with my armies.
Yep.
That's what I mean when I say the protocols of authority in a kingdom. This is very important, because the kingdom of heaven is a real place. It is a real kingdom. It's not some fairy tale notion that the biblical writers were imagining. It is a real kingdom, a tangible kingdom. So if you show up to the people, let's say when you show up to the people as my regent, as my representative in this province, if we were living in the ancient world, you would be showing up with something very specific. Today, it's completely different because of technology. But
Mhm.
let's put ourselves in an ancient context. You're going to show up with something very specific. You are going to show up with a document in your hand, and that document is going to be sealed. And that document is most likely going to have a very particular kind of seal on it. And the seals came in various types and sizes. Most prominently, it was a ring. This is a lion, by the way. It's not a skull. It's going to be a ring. Not always a ring, but in many cases. In the Mesopotamians used cylinders, the little cylinder. In fact, I have one here had one on my desk. I don't know where it went. Somebody sent me an actual Mesopotamian cylinder seal. I wish I should have it right now. It's
That's cool.
appropriate time for the prop, and I don't have it in my hand.
Next time.
So you would have a seal of some kind. The document would bear the seal of who? Of me, of your king, of the one who sent you. And that seal more often than not, would literally bear my likeness. It would be, sometimes it's a side profile. And of course, in the ancient world, it's not some high resolution photorealistic image. It was usually, as I said, it was a ring or a stamp or a cylinder, and it would have etched into it, if it's a cylinder, or if it's a ring, it would be molded in my likeness in such a way that they knew it was me. Because this likeness, they're seeing it on the money, they're seeing it on all the legal transactions. They recognize the seal. They know what the seal of the king looks like. And again, in most cases, the seal was literally a facsimile of his likeness, either in profile or looking straight. And so when they asked you, on whose authority do you govern us? You say, on the king's authority. And here is his seal. Here's the document. Here's his seal, that people could see that indeed you are representing me. So when God created Adam, I would actually be more specific than that, when the king, who is the son of God, created Adam, he created him in such a way that his own authority, the king's authority, would be visible and apparent to everyone who encountered him. He sealed him, in other words, with his own likeness.
That's powerful.
So you can imagine, and this was done, by the way, in a softened solution of resin or wax. And so if a scroll was rolled up, it would drip resin or wax on it. This is one iteration of the signet seal. And then they would take their signet ring and they would press it into the softened solution, and it would leave the imprint, and it would harden, and that would seal the document. So you can imagine then an analogy of this would be, or a metaphor rather, would be the king pressing his signet ring into the soil of the earth, into the moistened soil of the earth, and his impression, his likeness is imprinted in the flesh of Adam. And so when we talk about being made in the image of God, this is not about, it really bothers me, actually, when I hear all these preachers talk about the image of God and they miss the point. They miss the point. Because they want to say, so many of them, that being made in the image of God, it means that we are imbued uniquely, most of them will say, which is a biblical fallacy, but uniquely with the attributes of God. We are creative. We are rational thinkers. Other creatures are not rational. Other creatures are not creative. And then one might raise the objection, but what about the angels? And then what you'll get is a mythology, because usually what precedes in the form of an answer is not a biblical answer, it's mythological. Well, the angels aren't created with the same attributes as men. They don't have the creative capabilities that we do. they don't have the same rational minds, or whatever the answer will be. And I've heard many such answers. And so there's this desire to make the image of God something that makes mankind unique in the universe. That's a biblical fallacy. That's not true. There is no scripture that you could bring forward, that you could produce, that says, or that demonstrates, or that alludes to the idea that only the human species is made in the image and likeness of the Maker. It simply is not there. In fact, the opposite is true, and we have the proof that the opposite is true. We're not the first ones to bear the image and likeness of God. We're the younger sibling in a family. And all of the siblings in the family all look like the Father. They bear his image. And lest we be confused about the Father and the Son, Scripture tells us that the Son of God is the expressed likeness and image of the Father. So the original image bearer of the Father is the Son. He is the preeminent Son. But there are other sons in the family. We know that because we have the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, plural. But then we also have the Son of God, and that's why the New Testament writers designate him as the unique Son of God, the firstborn over all creation. So, what is the image of God? The image of God is the image of the Son of God. We look like the Son of God. The human species, mankind. We were made to look like him. That's the seal of his authority. That's how all other sentient, non-human entities who are not a part of the family can recognize immediately that we are, or at least we were supposed to be in our situation. So this is the seal. The image of God is the seal of his authority. He created us to be vice regents on planet Earth, and he sealed us with his likeness, which is the authentication of our dominion and his authority that we are supposed to exercise as his regents. So, and of course, Jesus displayed this perfectly. He perfectly executed the will of his Father, and he was a human being. So Jesus succeeded, and he demonstrated how we were supposed to effectuate the authority that was bequeathed to us from the King, the dominion that was given to mankind. Jesus demonstrates how we were supposed to operate, which is in full obedience to the Father. He did nothing that he did not see his Father doing. So that's just a side note. So the point is, if returning to this scenario of you being my vice regent in this distant province of mine, me being a king over a vast kingdom, you have my authority. The people can see. Why? Because you bear my seal, which has my likeness on it. They know. You come in my authority. They therefore also know that should they rise against you, should they attempt to usurp your authority, then my armies are coming. So my armies enforce your authority, right? My armies guarantee that it's the teeth behind your authority. Without my authority and my armies, then your authority is impotent. It's powerless. So now let's return to the Watchers. So returning to the Watchers have a problem. They, A, desire to copulate with the daughters, to wed and copulate with the daughters of men. B, I did not yet articulate the second and third motivations of the Watchers' transgression. So secondly, they wanted to produce offspring. This is apparent in the Book of Enoch. They desired to procreate. to have families. That's the second cause of their transgression, or motivation rather, of their transgression. And the third, and those are implicit in the text, the third is inferred. They wanted to do these things so that they could attain dominion of the earth. How can these extraterrestrial interlopers take dominion of the earth without A, incurring judgment immediately, or B, bringing down on them the armies of heaven, the firepower of heaven? They had to do it legally.
Mm-hmm.
They had to make a legal transaction with the vice regents of planet Earth, with the sons of Adam, whether they were in the line of Seth or Cain. They had to make a deal. And that's, by the way, why they chose to wed the women, because they wanted their offspring to be legitimate heirs, not bastards. So they wanted to create, very clearly, they wanted to create dynasties through their hybrid offspring, who were human enough to inherit the birthright of Adam, because their mothers were fully human. So the Watchers are playing a dangerous game. They're playing for dominion of the earth. They're getting to copulate with these beautiful women that they sexually desire. They're getting offspring. They get to have families, to procreate, to have children, right? Their own sons. And they get to govern the earth from behind the thrones of their hybrid sons. This is what I call rule by proxy.
Mm-hmm.
They do not have the authority to rule the earth directly, so they're going to rule by proxy through their hybrid offspring. And the reason why this is so important and foundational to the narrative in my book is because it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again at the end of the age, but in a little bit of a different scenario. But I believe that, as I said, that this is a precursor, this situation. It's a prelude to something that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the protocol of authority in play, in action. Why are the Watchers doing these things? Because if they just interlope into our domain and start throwing the women over their shoulders, then the armies of the kingdom are going to show up and detain them. It's that simple. The only way their plan could have worked is to do it in the way that they did it. And it worked for a long time. It was not like the Watchers wed the daughters of men. They copulated with them, procreated offspring, and then the flood came. No. Their offspring grew and prospered and dominated the sons of Adam. And
I have a quick...
This went on. I'll finish the sentence and then take a break. This went on for thousands of years, at least 1,000.
So that brings up an interesting question to me. When we get into the book of Jude and we see described for us the angels who sinned, Peter talks about this too, being held in everlasting chains, essentially in Tartarus. And Enoch even talks about the angels who sinned also being held in the unbreakable chains in a hot, a dry place. So a couple of questions, and I want to see where you line up on this. Those angels who sinned, I understand those to be of the 200 that swore that oath. Yeah, who decided they were going to take wives of any whom they saw.
That's right.
But the question that I have secondly is, because we understand that those are the ones being held in that place, and the Bible describes Jesus preaching as he descended into the earth to take the keys of sin and death. We speculate that he was preaching to those angels, like, "Hey, boys, the bell doth toll
that
for
word
thee."
Preaching can also mean declaring.
Sure. So I guess my wonder is, at what point were they cast into Tartarus? Do you think it was because
it's apparent in the Book of Enoch. If we use the Book of Enoch as our guide in this narrative, it's apparent they were cast into Tartarus after witnessing the destruction of their beloved sons.
Okay, so then
before the flood.
Okay, so I guess follow-up question then. Since they, as you put it, they would have had legal right to the earth in so much as they were given um a human wife. So they had and the marriage made it so they had a right to be here. Would that only extend up until the wife passed away and then
Oh, no, that was
suddenly,
through their offspring.
so the offering was the main anchor that once that destruction occurred, then all right, now you
They
go.
were, I believe there are some ancient, and I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole right now, but there's reason to believe, let's say, that the Watchers were invited before they came.
Mm,
So that's an interesting
yeah.
rabbit hole there, but we don't have time for that right now. But so the Watchers are executing rule by proxy, proximal authority through their hybrid children, through their hybrid sons, who are human enough to appropriate and execute the authority of Adam, to inherit the birthright. And they dominate the earth. Now, this is inferred. This part, again, I'm inferring. The story of the Watchers is very short in the Book of Enoch, by the way. It's only in the Book of Watchers. And which is, I think, I forget how many chapters the Book of Watchers is, 32, but they're very short.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not like this long narrative. Much has to be inferred, but there's enough information there that I think we can make logical inferences, such as that the offspring of the Watchers dominated the earth. They certainly subjugated the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, because the Book of the Book of Enoch says that the giants were devouring all the acquisitions of men, all the acquisitions of the land. In other words, men were laboring to keep these things fed. And the way that the context of the narrative is that they were forced to do so. And when they could no longer sustain the appetites of the giants, who were probably very many, then the giants began to devour mankind. There were at least 200 giants, but I think there were a lot more than that.
Sure.
Because the giants themselves are procreating. And if you're wondering how that might have been accomplished, you can read Birthright, and I have several hypotheses there. But so there's at least 200 giants, and they are dominating the human species, clearly. So the scenario would look like this is what I call the empire of the gods. This is what I believe the golden age represents, and indeed it does. Look at Zep Tepi, the first time. The I think we talked about this last time. The Egyptian tradition of the golden age, the first time. It's the gods are ruling on earth among men. It's the same with the Greeks. So the golden age of the Greeks, when the gods are ruling, and in both cases, it's a time of great knowledge and great abundance and peace and prosperity, except for in the Hebrew narrative.
Stark contrast.
In the Hebrew narrative, it's a disaster. It's a nightmare. And the giants are oppressing the human species and eating them, devouring them, and devouring everything, by the way. They were sinning against the beasts of the earth as well. And when you read that in context, you understand that it means they were eating them, because there was a prohibition on the consumption of flesh in the antediluvian world, according to Genesis, right? So the Watchers were consuming flesh, human flesh, and the flesh of animals. And just like we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that Adam was a gardener, we should also disabuse ourselves of the notion that these were big, dumb giants walking around with clubs, swinging clubs. These were exceedingly intelligent beings who were the offspring of a species that is more remarkable than our own in regard to their capabilities. And of course, I'm referring to an angelic race. So when you get human plus human, you get human. Even if you take the best human plus the best human, you still only get the best human. as a result, if you're lucky. Well, what happens when you take humans, the best humans, these antediluvians, plus angels? Because that's what you get with these hybrids. You're going to get an extraordinary creature, completely unsanctioned. They were not supposed to exist. This is a grave transgression, and that's the Watchers knew that. They're essentially illicitly creating a new kind of creature in the universe, and for their own design, indeed, to usurp the human species on planet Earth. So the giants were likely exceedingly intelligent and cunning and obviously strong, very possibly telepathic. But it's likely that the human species was also telepathic at that time. So this is an inference that I make into the story. It's an extrapolation of the story. I think, more accurately said, it's an extrapolation of the very short narrative in Enoch. That the result of this would have been the giants spreading out all over the earth and creating their own kingdoms. This is, in fact, the story of Plato, and I forget if I was talking to you about this the other day. This is what the gods do in Plato's narrative of Atlantis. Mm-hmm. I think we did discuss this.
Yes, we did.
So this is what I believe the Watchers were doing. Again, they're ruling by proxy. These are the living gods walking among men. And certainly they would have also, among all of their other transgressions, they would have desired to be worshipped. And so imagine this unfolding for thousands of years, at least 1,000. Reckoned, if you reckon the timeline of the Genesis 5 genealogy, if you take that as an accurate reckoning of time, then you at least get, according to the Septuagint, not the Masoretic text, according to the Septuagint, then you at least get, like, I think it comes out to be 1,200 years or so.
Yeah, doesn't the Septuagint add like an extra 100 years?
Yes, rather the Masoretes subtract 100 years.
Okay.
So, and we all are reading the Masoretic text. That's what our Bibles are. But the early church was reading Septuagint. So the minimum time frame here that we're dealing with is 1,000 years. 1,000 years of what? 1,000 years of the Watchers and their offspring ruling on planet Earth. That's the Golden Age. That's the empire of the gods. And the reason why I use that title very specifically, empire, not kingdom, empire, because these are various kingdoms, 200 kingdoms on Earth that are being governed by the giant hybrid sons of the Watchers, which again is Plato's story of Atlantis. We won't rehash that. We won't retread that ground. So now one might ask, so is that an allegory, or is that just a mythology, or is it veritable history? I would lean in the direction of veritable history. I think if you look back into the past, if we could build a time machine and go back to the days of Noah, that we would witness an empire of the gods. Now, we would not, however, I do not believe that all of these cultures, all of these kingdoms, rather, would have been like Atlantis, where it's just everyone's enjoying this advanced technology and they're all living very comfortable lives, and with cities, with public transportation and skyscrapers. No, that's not what I envision at all, because it's oppressive. It's oppressive. The technology, the knowledge, some technology was given to the offspring of men, and they used it to do very bad things. It introduced a bloodlust, for example, into the world that had not previously existed, because they were making weapons. But I envision, and this is just my conceptualization of the antediluvian world. Okay, this is coming out of my imagination here. I envision a world in which the gods, the offspring of the gods, are in possession of advanced technology. But their subjects, the human beings that are subjugated to them, are living a very rudimentary existence, Bronze Age existence.
Sure.
And all of the produce that they're laboring to grow is in large part going into the coffers of their giant overlords, right? So it's a very oppressive hierarchy and a very depressing scenario for the human species.
It smacks of the Israelites when they were under Egypt's rule.
That's right. Yes. And, you know, I always like to reference the movie Stargate.
Sure.
When I think about this. And I don't know if the audience remembers the movie, not the TV show necessarily, the movie Stargate.
Mm-hmm. I do.
If you recall, I remember seeing that in the movie theater when I was a kid, back in the 90s. If you recall that in the movie, they go to a planet through a Stargate. They use the Stargate to transport themselves, these military guys, to another planet. And when they get there, they discover a Bronze Age civilization, or perhaps even less than that, that is being dominated by this Egyptian deity, Ra, Amun-Ra. But he's an extraterrestrial and he has advanced technology. And that, I think, is perhaps somebody who was writing the script or coming up with the idea for that movie. Maybe they knew something that we don't in regard to archaeology. But I think that is what we would be looking at. So I would not be expecting to find grand cities like Atlantis, like these wonderful cities, the remains of these advanced cities. Rather, I would be expecting to find the remains of a Bronze Age or even perhaps a Stone Age civilization because of the oppression. When you have that kind of oppression, you don't have time to build libraries and expand knowledge and build wonderful, beautiful architectural buildings. All your whole existence revolves around sustaining the gods.
Yep, subsistence.
So it would be the finding any kind of artifacts related to the advanced civilization, which would be the offspring of the gods themselves, the giants and their wives and their children. That would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Oh, man. So that's the way I envision the antediluvian world. Now, not to say at all, as we talked about last time, that the offspring of Adam were stupid cavemen. Absolutely not. These were extraordinary human beings whose capabilities exceed our own. Physically speaking, mentally speaking, they were of greater intelligence than we are. Why? Because they're closer to the source. They're closer to the prototypical human being, the source of our genome, Adam and Eve. So these are remarkable people. And in some cases, you might have had a flourishing in which pockets of humans were flourishing that were perhaps not under the dominion of the Watchers and their offspring. Now, I have no idea if that would have been the case, but I suspect that many of the members in the line of Seth were not under the dominion of the Watchers and their offspring. I suspect that might be true. So they might have been living apart in a sort of a different civilization. That's just, me spitballing here. But anyway, I think that's what the dynamic looks like. I think we're looking at this very advanced brotherhood, is how I would put it. An advanced brotherhood of hybrid demigods. They have the technology. They have the knowledge. Men, they were taught how to make weapons and do other things, and basically were only given enough knowledge to be satisfied, but not enough to be a threat to the offspring of the Watchers. You see? Because that's what you and I would do if we were the Watchers. We would give these people who we want to subjugate just enough knowledge and technology to satisfy them, but not enough for them ever to become a threat to us or our designs.
That's like in the documentary that you were part of with the Fall Brothers, where they were talking about the Hollow Earth theory. I forget the man's last name, but Dave, he was talking about, he had originally been working on antimatter, and he gets approached by this team and says, hey, you're working on antimatter? Awesome. We've already solved it. We want you to come work for us. And then he learns about the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases. And inside there, we have military working with these otherworldly creatures, and we're giving them stuff that we consider to be like junks, salt water, rocks, weird elements that we just happen to have in abundance on Earth. And in exchange, they're giving us this amazing technology, but to them are these very low-level toys. I can imagine that being a very real scenario, even inside the antediluvian world as well.
Right? They wouldn't be giving us anything that would cause us to become a threat to them.
Exactly. Nothing that would be a problem for them. So oh man, you covered so much ground there. I wanted to touch real quick on just briefly, because this came up in a lot of the comments on our last stream that we did together, and I wanted to just clear up a few things for some people. A lot of people, they get really hung up on the idea that because it says in Matthew 22, where Jesus says, we have the question, well, suppose a man marries a wife and then he dies, and so she takes his brother and then he dies, and maybe he's got 6 brothers and she's had 7 men. Well, whose wife is she in eternity? And Jesus says, well, she's not gonna be anybody's. And he describes her, well, she'll be like the angels who are not given in marriage in heaven. Yes, we understand that the angels are not given in marriage, but the Bible says nothing of them being able to have sex. And so a lot of people,
the question, the controversy is irrelevant. It's a non-controversy, because we're not talking about something that happens in heaven.
Yes, and that was going to be the next thing I was going to say.
Talking about something that happened on earth, and for a very specific purpose, and that was indeed part of the transgression. Was the Watchers were seeking to have wives, and in the judgment of the Watchers, God actually says to them, "You have no need of wives. I didn't create you to have wives. You have everything here. You had everything basically in my kingdom.
They're immortal. An immortal being doesn't need to further its own species."
And that's what he tells them. You were living in immortality, and you had no need for wives or to procreate and so forth. And so the contention, that controversy is it's quite literally a non-controversy. And I don't understand why people who raise it think that they are somehow raising a point of contention here in this story. It is completely irrelevant.
Yeah. Also,
we're talking about a transgression. We're talking about something that wasn't supposed to happen. This is not normative. This is going against the dictates of the kingdom of heaven. This is breaking the law. Yeah. This is the context of the Watchers, not something that is normative in heaven.
Yep. Also considering that the Bible says that they had to disrobe from their first estate, and it uses the word oikaterion, which we understand is to be like this outer heavenly dwelling, to even be able to engage in sexual relations.
Yeah, and there's some speculation as to what that might mean. But it's clear that the Watchers are physical beings. It's clear that they can have sexual intercourse with human women. And, and this is sort of taking us down a different path, but I do not ascribe to any beings in the universe, but certainly not to angels, mythical metamorphic powers, which so many people do. For some reason, I don't. If a Watcher can turn itself into whatever it wants, or just generate human flesh, like create a human meat suit and walk around in it, then we are pretty much dealing with genies at that point. We are dealing with the genie from Aladdin's lamp in the cartoon.
Sure. Well,
Robin Williams genie from Aladdin's lamp. That's what we're dealing with. If angels can do all the things that people suppose that they can do, there's some people who even think that angels turn themselves into technology, like a flying saucer, which is preposterous. I don't understand. why we would ever attribute such ridiculous metamorphic powers to anything, any kind of a creature. That is pure fantasy, and nowhere is that exhibited in the biblical narrative. And then people will retort, yeah, but angels can eat and drink, right? As if that proves that they've turned themselves into flesh. No. You see, it actually proves the opposite of that argument, that they do have bodies. They are corporeal beings.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Not that they turn themselves into them, but they are. We are very much like them. They are our older siblings. So then, of course, you have this whole contention about, well, aren't they spiritual beings? Well, yes, but aren't we? Are we not? We are. We are a composite of spirit and flesh. Why should we think they're any different?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and spiritual, by the way, doesn't mean what we think it means. It doesn't mean ethereal. That's not what spiritual means in the Bible. It doesn't mean ethereal. Is Jesus spiritual?
Of course.
Then how can he be spiritual in that sense and have a body? Because he does.
Yep.
So and this is where I would have some contention with the late Dr. Heiser. I don't believe that Elohim designates spiritual beings. Rather, I do, but I don't believe that it equates to disembodied beings.
Same.
This idea that creatures are disembodied is bizarre to me. There is one group of entities that are disembodied. Dead Nephilim are disembodied. But this is a curse. And the reason why it's a curse is because it is an unnatural condition. That's why it's a curse. As I always say, this is the I forget what the curse, the Aztec curse or whatever it was from Pirates of the Caribbean, where they have flesh, but they're in this situation in which they're in this unnatural condition where they have no way to satisfy the desires of their flesh. So they have flesh, but they only have flesh. I forget what the context was. They only have flesh. Apparently they don't actually have flesh, because when I think it was the full moon, you could see exactly how they really were. And they were these basically skeletal beings, persons this is perhaps a very clumsy analogy, but the point is that this is a curse, just like it was a curse in the movie. They're hungry, they're thirsty, but they can't satisfy their hunger and thirst. It's just the same thing. This is the condition of the Nephilim, of dead Nephilim. They're cursed. And the very nature of the curse is to be forced to exist in the world in an unnatural condition. A condition in which you still have all of the desires of the flesh, but no flesh. This is a curse. So I don't believe that this is the natural condition of heavenly beings. I think that the condition of the Nephilim, dead Nephilim, the unclean spirits, demonic spirits, is an intolerable curse, precisely because it is unnatural. So I won't be dead horse anymore. But,
sure. Well, even Chuck Missler pointed out when he talked about Jesus Christ and him appearing inside the room with his disciples following the crucifixion.
And then eating a piece of bread and fish.
Yep. And saying, this doesn't make him, like you said, this doesn't make him ethereal. This means that he enjoys more dimensionality than we have access to.
Which is almost certainly true.
Oh, yeah.
So,
100%.
And that's different than being an ethereal being.
Yes.
And so I think that when we talk about spiritual, I think we are talking about beings that do enjoy access to a higher dimensionality than we do, that are like us very much, but they're superior. They're one grade superior to us. Remember, David says that you made us, meaning mankind, you made man to be a little lower than the heavenly beings. And so our natures are very similar. And I don't think there's any creatures in the universe that have unconditional immortality. I think all creatures have conditional immortality. What what I call in my book intrinsic immortality. In other words, you are literally created to be immortal. There's only one being that fits that description in the Bible, and that's God, and the Son of God. Those would be the two personages in the scriptures who I think would qualify for being inherently immortal. So intrinsically immortal means that you are created as an immortal being. That's not angels. That's not angels. Angels, like human beings, are what I would describe as extrinsic immortals. Their immortality is extrinsic. Intrinsic means something that's innate to you. Extrinsic, it's something that's exterior to you. And so that would be, the theological term is conditional immortality. So they would be conditionally immortal, and they are. Angels are conditionally immortal. How do I know that? Because this is conveyed to us through the story of Adam and Eve, who are expulsed from the Garden of Eden and who no longer have immortality. Why? Because they don't have access to the tree of life.
Mm-hmm.
This, by the way, as I said earlier, in my estimation, is an analogy, is an allegory. The tree of life is the Son of God elsewhere in the scriptures. So chew on that for a moment. But so this is extrinsic or conditional immortality that Adam and Eve clearly are enjoying in the garden because they have access to something, some revivifying force that reconstitutes their biology. It's an external thing. It's not innate. It's external to them, to their bodies. Well, why do I think this applies to angels? Because the Elohim make a declaration when they're expulsing, this is the council, by the way, the divine council deliberating the matter after Adam and Eve transgress. And the conclusion of this deliberation is the following: they must be expelled lest they continue to reach out and take from the tree of life, like us, and live and be immortal and live forever. I paraphrased it. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the wording there, it's and also like us take of the tree of life. So there's this wording, and I'm butchering it there as well, but it's in my book and it's apparent in the text that the Elohim themselves are enjoying this life renewing force, and that if they were separated from it, they would also die. Or at least begin to become subject to some kind of degeneration, entropy. So that, of course, leads to the question, and we're getting way afield here, but
I love it.
And I posit this question in my book: if this is the case, and I believe it is the case, that there are no intrinsically immortal creatures in the universe save the Father and his Son, then it follows that those angels who depart from, let's say, the Father's house, because that's what the Garden of Eden is ultimately, that depart from the garden, the paradise of God, as it's called in the book of Revelation, that they are also degenerating. That they have conditional immortality, and if they are separated from that life-giving force, they begin to, in layman's terms, to die, albeit in their case probably very, very, very slowly. So that might give us a little bit of insight into what it means to disrobe your oikoterion, your first estate, to leave your first estate. You are forfeiting something when you do that. Mm-hmm. You're cutting yourself off from something. So this is something to consider. And as you can see, when you loose yourself from a wooden literalism and a rigid, inflexible, literal reading of the Bible, which you cannot use that approach anyway, because too many things wouldn't make any sense at all. For example, Jesus says, "I am the door," and we know he's not a door. So we've already liberated ourselves to some extent. There's all kinds of very intriguing questions that arise.
Sure.
And I don't know how we got onto this topic, but since we're here, I wonder if this is where the mythos or the legend of vampires and vampirism comes from.
Ooh, yes, getting into Gary Wayne territory there.
Because, well, I posit this in my book as well. I wonder if these angels, these members of the elder race, as they call them, the defected members of the kingdom who are not human, are non-human elder siblings, the devil and his angels, if they have to, because they're separated from the tree of life, if they have to reconstitute their biology, repair it continually, and the only nearest to kin resource that they would have to do that on planet Earth is, guess who? Us. So maybe vampires are in fact real, and they
Life
are
in the blood,
and they are defected elder siblings. They are these quote unquote fallen angels. So that's something to chew on as well. Of course, this is all within the realm of wild speculation here, but it's entertaining at the very least.
Well, folks, I'm going to have to unfortunately cut it there for the evening. This has been an amazing conversation. My newborn's having a fit right now. But Tim, I would love to have you back on again if we can make it happen again. Folks, if you would take a look at our description box down below, you're going to find all the links there to Tim's book, his website, everything. Please drop a like, a subscribe, and a share. Again, so sorry to pull the plug on this, folks. I got to go tend to a 5-week-old. But this has been awesome. Thank you again so much, Tim, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it.